Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Blast Off Theater. How are you guys doing today? Good to hear. Well, my name is Peter, and I will be your mission briefing officer. I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about what's going on in the space program right now, specifically with the exploration of Mars. Now, the picture up on screen right now is one of the most common views of the red planet. There's not much liquid water anywhere on the surface, as well as no life anywhere to be found. However, scientists think at one time the planet looked more like this, with oceans covering parts of the planet, and it may even have held life at one time in the past. Now, Mars is half the size of Earth and has a third the gravity relative to Earth. This means if you weigh 150 pounds here on Earth, on Mars you would only weigh about 50 pounds. Another difference between Earth and Mars is how the orbits are, or how long it takes us to get around the sun. Now, for us here on Earth, one orbit or time around the sun is a year. On Mars, it's actually about twice as long as it is here on Earth. So you have to have exact precision and launch at just the right time in order to get to Mars in a reasonable amount of time. Depending on when we launch to get to Mars, it can take us anywhere from 6 months to a full year to get to the planet with our current rocket technology. So we do want to launch at just the right time. Now, for the most part today, we'll be talking about the Curiosity rover. It's about the size of a 4-door Mini Cooper car, and its full height with its camera mast extended is 7 feet tall. Now, in order to get it to Mars in the first place, we launched it aboard a rocket on November 26, 2011. The rocket itself was an Atlas V heavy lift rocket and did its job very well of getting us to Mars. But once we started descending into the atmosphere of Mars, we used a method we had never tried before. Let's check it out. The final stage of the launch vehicle gave the spacecraft the final push and spun up for the 8.5-month journey to the red planet. 10 minutes before hitting the Martian atmosphere, the cruise stage separated and final preparation for entry could begin. Curiosity hit the atmosphere traveling 13,000 miles per hour and began to slow down. At this point, it fired thrusters to help steer towards the landing target. Weights were then thrown off the vehicle to rebalance it and prepare for parachute deploy, which occurred after slowing to 1,000 miles per hour. Once below the speed of sound, the heat shield separated and the rover began looking for the ground with the landing radar. At about 1 mile above the surface, the rover and the sky crane dropped out of the back shuttle and fired thrusters to help it slow down even further. 60 feet above the surface, the rover was lowered from the sky crane and the wheels were deployed in preparation for landing. Now, at the time of landing, Curiosity was traveling only about 1 mile an hour. This is down from the 13,000 miles an hour it was traveling just 7 minutes earlier. Once weight was detected on Curiosity's wheels, the rover was cut loose to begin its mission, and the sky crane flew off to crash land somewhere else on Mars. Its mission complete. Now, due to communication time between Earth and Mars, it wasn't until about 7 minutes later that we here on Earth found out that the landing was successful. Here's mission control at the time. We're a little bit excited. Actually, this goes on for like 10 more minutes, which I don't have time for, so I will be cutting that off. Those people we just saw were the flight controllers of mission control. Every mission that NASA sends into space has to have a mission control center. People here on Earth dedicated to making sure that the mission goes smoothly. Now, anytime that mission has humans on board, like the old Space Shuttle program or the International Space Station, the Mission Control Center is here in Houston, just across the street at the Johnson Space Center. Now, because this is for missions like this one that are deep space and unmanned missions, mission control is actually not here in Houston. It's in Pasadena, California, at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, or JPL. That's where we stay in communication with Curiosity during its mission. Now, communicating with something on Mars, much like traveling there, depends on where we are in our orbits. If we are at our closest point to Mars, it takes about 5 minutes for a message to pass between Earth and Mars. If, however, we are on opposite sides of the sun, it could take 20 minutes for a message to pass between Earth and Mars. So communication is kind of tricky. Now, we communicate using something called the Deep Space Network. It is a network of satellites that orbit Mars, as well as antennae back here on Earth that receive the signal and send it off to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory so we can stay in communication with Curiosity during its mission. Now, Curiosity is only the latest in a long line of rovers and landers that have been exploring Mars. We've set up 3 lander-only missions so far. Those are the ones indicated by the blue arrows. Our first rover mission also did have a lander. It was the Pathfinder mission with the Sojourner rover. Yes. Then in 2004, we set up 2 more rovers, the twin Mars exploration rovers, Spirit and Opportunity. Now, they were only scheduled to drive around the planet for about 90 days before their mission would be over. They actually long outlived that 90-day mission expectancy. Spirit's mission only ended in 2011 when it got stuck and froze to death in the cold Martian winter. Opportunity, on the other hand, is still traveling today, still setting us back today and giving us the opportunity to learn more about Mars than we could have otherwise. Now, Curiosity itself landed in Gale Crater. Since landing, we've driven approximately 8 miles or 13 kilometers on the surface of the planet. This is driving at our maximum speed of 1.5 inches per second, as well as making frequent stops, sometimes for even days at a time, to take samples of rocks and soil, as well as to take photographs, such as these 2 we received not long after landing on Mars. Now, Curiosity's mission on the surface of Mars is to look for signs that the planet could have sustained life at one time in the past. And one of the things we were looking for is signs that liquid water existed on Mars in a large enough quantity, like in rivers, lakes, oceans, and streams. And these photos actually demonstrate that there was water at one time on Mars in quantities that large. These rock formations only form in the presence of water, and some of them only in rivers, lakes, oceans, and streams. So this is great pictures to receive early on. Told us we were in the right place, and not only because these are signs of water, but also because these rock formations are the best ones to preserve organic chemicals, or the building blocks of life. So these were great pictures to receive early on. And after we received these photos, we told Curiosity to drive down into a dried out lake bed named Yellowknife Bay. In Yellowknife Bay, we told the rover to find a nice looking rock. We found a rock we liked, named it John Klein, and then drilled into it, leaving this hole. Now, the hole itself is not very large. In fact, if you have a dime with you today, it is bigger around than that hole. But we were still able to learn a lot from it and the other 11 drill sites we have drilled into since landing on Mars 3 years ago. From these drill sites, we've learned that this area on Mars did indeed have liquid water, and we also found organic chemicals. At our second drill site, we found the chemical chlorobenzene. This is one of the building blocks of life, but not life in and of itself. Currently on Mars, we do not have the technology to detect if life does or did exist on a planet. However, we are hoping on a future either rover or human mission to Mars to send that technology and find out once and for all, does or did life exist on Mars? Now, when we drill into the surface of Mars, we first have to clear it off of the iron oxide or rust dust that covers the surface of the planet, giving it that red color. We use this wire bristle brush to do that, and then drill into the planet using this jackhammer drill. The samples we take are then deposited into the rover's instruments, which cover the body of the rover and are provided by countries from all over the world. We'll look at a few of these really quickly. First off, up at the top of the rover, we have the eyes, the mass cams. These are 2 high-definition color cameras that allow us to look out at the surface of Mars and see it as it actually is, in full color. Now, we use these cameras to look for interesting rock formations to go investigate with some of our other instruments, such as ChemCam. Now, ChemCam is a camera, but it also has a very powerful laser. This laser is actually so powerful we can use it to vaporize the very top layer of rocks and dust, and then analyze that using a spectrometer to figure out exactly what the samples are made out of. Along the same lines, we have 3 other spectrometers on Curiosity, each looking for something different in the samples we take from the surface of Mars. And finally, we have our radiation detectors, the RAD and the DAN. Now, the DAN is looking below the surface at subsurface ice and water. The RAD, on the other hand, is looking at background radiation levels. Everywhere we go, we're subjected to radiation from the sun. Here on Earth, we have a nice thick atmosphere that protects us. On Mars, the atmosphere isn't as thick, so there isn't as much protection offered from radiation. So what we are trying to do with the RAD is figure out how much protection we have to put on our vehicles in the future once we start sending humans to Mars. Now, this picture here gives you a little bit of a size reference for all the rovers we have on Mars right now. You can see Sojourner at the bottom, very small rover, small wheels, small solar panels for power. Spirit and Opportunity are a little bit bigger, with bigger wheels, bigger solar panels, and more scientific equipment. Now, Curiosity is absolutely massive. In fact, this right here is a full-size replica of one of the wheels of the Curiosity rover, so you get a little bit of a size reference for how big this rover actually is. Now, the wheel itself is about the same size as the entire Sojourner rover's body. And if you notice, it's hollow and it doesn't have a tire. That is because an air-filled tire on Mars would explode due to the less dense atmosphere on the planet. So we went with a hollow wheel design. Now there is a drawback to this design, and that is as you're driving around a rocky surface like Mars, rocks can get inside of your wheel, and as the wheel spins, they'll tumble around and end up damaging your wheel, putting holes into it, and that's not a good thing when your nearest repair station is on another planet. So trying to help us out a little bit, we did put holes into our wheel, pre-built holes. These are actually to let rocks out of the wheel, but also to imprint this pattern into the surface of Mars. Now, there are 3 lines of long and short holes. This is a Morse code message. It spells out 3 letters, J, P, L. Those Jet Propulsion Laboratory scientists who are controlling the rover are kind of marking their territory with the rover as they drive around the surface of the planet. Now, there is one thing that Curiosity does not have that the other rovers do, and that is solar panels. Now, there's a good reason for that, and that's because with Spirit and Opportunity and the Sojourner rover, we found a problem with solar panels on Mars. These rovers often found themselves short on power as dust settled on their solar panels. For Curiosity, we needed a good, strong, and reliable source of power to keep the rover going in all sorts of conditions, and for as long as our hardware can last. Curiosity is 5 times bigger, 5 times heavier, with 15 times the weight of scientific equipment relative to Spirit and Opportunity. Its mission involves driving around its landing site at a maximum speed of 1.5 inches per second. It also collects samples of rocks and soil with a scoop and a jackhammer drill. These samples are then deposited into the rover's instruments, which we just looked at, and that is where they are analyzed. Now, the process of analyzing these samples takes quite a bit of power. That's where our new power source comes in, the MMRTG. The multi-mission radioisotope thermoelectric generator has been used for years to power spacecraft traveling to other planets. Even the Apollo missions used them on the moon. Here's a scientist to tell you more.
Behind me you can see a full-scale model of Curiosity, including the generator in the back. On this half-scale model of the generator, you can see what's inside. The generator contains a specially produced form of plutonium dioxide. The natural decay of this radioisotope gives off heat, which these thermocouples can turn into electricity. The generator provides both electrical power and heat to the rover. About 100 watts of electrical power is used to continuously charge the rover's battery. Also, heat can be pumped off of the generator using pipes to keep the rover's insides warm, including the scientific instruments.
With this, we had a good, strong, and reliable source of power to keep the rover going in all sorts of conditions and for as long as our hardware can last. Now, you may be wondering, what are we doing next to explore Mars? Well, in just a couple years, we have a new lander going to Mars. It will be called InSight and perform sort of a doctor's checkup on the planet. Having a thermometer to go deep beneath the surface and take Mars's internal temperature, it will also have a seismometer to take Mars's pulse, looking for earthquakes or Marsquakes, if you will. And with InSight, what we are hoping to learn is how terrestrial planets or rocky planets like Earth and Mars formed in the past. 2020, we have a new rover going to Mars. Same size, same body plan as Curiosity, just with much updated equipment and a new mission, because it will be exploring a new location on Mars. We're currently deciding exactly where that will be over at NASA right now. Finally, we have Orion. Now, Orion is NASA's next human exploration vehicle and will be used to one day send astronauts to Mars. But before we can do that, we do have to perfect some of our technologies. Our spacesuit systems, as well as rovers and habitation technologies, all have to be perfected before we can send humans to Mars. We have to ensure we can bring them home safely first. Now, NASA does have a date in mind already for when we would like to have the first human footprints on Mars, and it's not very long from now, only about 20 years. The year 2035, early in 2040, are we currently hoping to have the first human footprint on Mars, and who knows, maybe that first person to step foot on Mars is here at Space Center Houston today. Now, unfortunately, that does bring us to the end of today's presentation, but I do hope I piqued your curiosity a little bit. If you'd like to learn more about anything I talked about, you can visit any one of those websites up on screen, or pick up one of the pieces of paper over on the side of the stage. I've got plenty of links and keywords to keep you up to date on all aspects of our space program. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask. I'll be available to answer those over by the side of the stage. And ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of all of us here at Space Center Houston and the Johnson Space Center, thank you so much for visiting, and I do hope the rest of your day is out of this world.